With the changes to self-isolation rules following a positive COVID test, there are a number of things that employers need to be aware of. So from the 24th of February, the legal requirement to stay at home if you have a COVID positive test has been removed. However, what the government are saying is that if you test positive for COVID, you're advised to stay at home. So the advice is to remain at home, but it's no longer a legal requirement. So how does this impact on employers, and what should you be doing with regards to your staff? Well, the first thing that you should do as an employer is to review and, if necessary, update your COVID risk assessment. Hopefully you already have one in place, and it's a case of looking at that and seeing where the risks lie within your organisation, whether that be to staff and visitors or to customers if you're in a customer-facing environment. You should then look at what your position is in relation to COVID testing. Now, I know a number of people have put in place a requirement for staff to test regularly as part of their risk assessment and their risk mitigation. So one of the things that you should be doing is looking and seeing if you're going to continue with that. Noting, of course, that the free lateral flow tests are going to be ending soon. So it may be that you won't be able to have staff test for COVID on a regular basis once those free tests end. Or it may be that as a business or organisation you decide that you want to purchase those for staff and continue testing. Then you need to decide on your policy. What is your policy going to be in relation to staff who test positive for COVID? Are you going to require them to attend at work, or are you going to get them to work from home if they can, or are you going to just say actually you have to be at home regardless? And then once you've decided on your policy and what you're doing, you need to communicate that to your staff very clearly. So what are your options as an employer in relation to this? Well, you can, of course, require all staff to attend at work regardless of their positive status. Because it's no longer a legal requirement to stay at home, you can say to staff, you have to attend at work. You could always put in place mitigation steps if you do decide that staff have to attend at work. So that could be asking staff to wear a face covering, to work in a different location or area, and or to social distance. Then you need to consider what you're going to do. For example, if you have a customer-facing employees, so those who work in an environment where people are coming in, are you going to have the same policy in place for those versus those that perhaps work in an office environment or in the back office? And how are you going to deal with that? And if you require staff to work from home whilst positive, and they can work from home, then of course there's no problem going to arise. But if you are asking staff to stay at home who are fit and well, even though they might have a positive test, if they are fit to work, then you are required to pay them when they are at home. There are, of course, a number of possible issues that are going to arise as a result of this change in the law. And until the situation is either ironed out with regards to positive testing and testing requirements, and the fact that people aren't going to be testing anymore, there are going to be issues. So what are the things that could arise? Well, the first is to note that obviously if somebody is unwell and not able to work, then the normal sickness absence rules will apply. So they are off sick and either they're paid company sick pay or statutory sick pay if they meet the qualifying criteria. It's important to note that the COVID statutory sick payments scheme will cease for any absences after the 17th of March. So currently employers can recover statutory sick pay from the government if it's COVID related, and it is payable from the first day of absence. This is going to be removed, so we're back to the normal statutory sick pay rules, which is where the employer bears the cost, and there are waiting days in relation to sickness payments. So employees have to be off for a period of time before they can qualify, and obviously they have to qualify for statutory sick pay. As I was saying earlier, if you do require staff to stay at home, if they're fit to work and ready to work, then you must pay them as normal. So they shouldn't be financially out of pocket if your decision is that a positive test means you stay at home. You do, of course, have to be mindful of employee confidentiality in relation to COVID testing and COVID results. So, of course, unless the employee says that you can disclose to other members of staff, you should keep that confidential. And employees who are concerned about working with someone who may be positive may contact you to discuss this once you communicate your policy around COVID positive staff. So if, for example, your decision is staff who have a positive test are required to come into work regardless, and you know that you have employees who have been particularly worried in the past, or maybe are clinically vulnerable or live with someone who's clinically vulnerable, it's important that you have a discussion with them and explain why you've reached that decision and what steps you're taking to mitigate the risk to them, so as to head off any issues arising. There have been situations where conflicts have arisen within organisations where the employee was living with somebody who had a positive test. So when the rules changed around having to isolate if you had someone at home who had a positive test, there were staff who were attending at work, and then colleagues were becoming upset and aggrieved because they were worried about the possibility of transmission from that person who was at home. So it's important to keep in mind that those concerns and fears will still be there, and your job as the employer is to try to manage and mitigate those. And of course, just a reminder that free tests will be ending, and so there may come a time where tests are no longer available, staff aren't testing, and therefore you won't know that somebody who doesn't have symptoms is positive. And so that may take away some of these issues. But of course, currently, when somebody has potential symptoms or is feeling unwell, they take a test and then are able to proceed with certainty, knowing that they do or don't have COVID. So whilst it may take away some of the issues that are going to arise about those asymptomatic people attending work knowing that they have COVID, there is a secondary issue, in my view, where people who are unwell with cold-like symptoms are taking a more cautious approach and don't want to go into work, for example, because of fear of spreading COVID. So there are lots of things for employers to consider here. The main thing and the main piece of advice that I would offer is that employers should be considering exactly what their policy is going to be in relation to staff who have a positive COVID test, and what you're going to do about testing and paying staff going forward if you're asking them to stay at home. If you have any questions about anything that I've covered in today's video, then myself or my colleagues here at the Real Employment Law Advice team would be very happy to help. You can get in contact with us via our website, which is at realemploymentlawsadvice.co.uk, and all our contact details are in the show notes below.